Good morning. Good morning to everybody joining us today. Thank you for joining our spring virtual farm trip. The Ag Venture program and I are certainly excited to welcome you. We have many thousand of you who are joining us today, and we could not be happier that you're here. And we're excited to teach you guys about almond blossom, bloom time here in the valley, the roles bee play, and some of the things that farmers and plant doctors do to make sure that you guys have affordable, safe, and abundant food. So before we dive right in and give you guys an adventure in agriculture, we're going to go over just a few housekeeping things first and foremost. But no, most importantly, we're excited to be here and hope that you guys learn a few things and have a great time. In order to do so, we are going to go over a few house rules. So first of all, this is a Zoom webinar for those of you guys who are joining us on the Zoom site. Looks like we have 170 classes so far. And I know that there were several hundred over on YouTube Live. So we're excited to have you. Those on YouTube, those on Zoom, this is a webinar. So you are not going to see the icons of all the other classes. If you've never seen a webinar, you're just going to see the information that we are pushing out to you. In each of our platforms that we're using to stream this, there is the ability to do a Q&A with our panelists today. So for those in Zoom, that's going to be the Q&A function, and those over in YouTube, there's a Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. We want you guys to be able to interact with our farmers and producers and panelists, and that's why they are here. That said, it's for questions only. Okay, if we see other comments, things that are being put up there that are inappropriate or do not pertain to what we're doing, they'll be deleted. And if you continue, we will remove you. We do have someone solely dedicated to monitoring those channels. Your teachers can see you, we can see you. So just keep that in mind. We want you to have a great time, but we want to make sure everyone has a great experience. So keep that in mind for questions only. If not, we will remove you. For those following along, we do have a worksheet. It looks something like this. For those of you who are following along, it is fillable. It's on our website. So if you weren't aware, you can send that to your students for them to complete later. This will be recorded. So it will be recorded and available to you guys on our website in the next day or two. So we're excited to have you. We're excited for you guys to be able to use the recording later in the worksheet. My name is Krista. I am the San Joaquin County Ag Venture Coordinator, and we're excited to provide you guys an adventure in agriculture. And so without a bunch of mumbo jumbo, I think we should jump right into it. As you've probably seen, if you've driven around lately, a lot of our trees look a little bit different. They're not as green as they typically are. They're more of a pink and a white. And so I want to talk to you guys about what that is and why it's important and why we're talking about it. Almonds are a huge industry here in California and certainly in our county. They are a specialty crop that we grow quite a bit of. So without further ado, I have a friend of mine, Farmer Nick, who is out in an almond orchard right now. And I think we should go out and talk to him about almond blossom, what farmers do, what it is, what happens to trees over the winter, all of that good stuff. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you here. This is the most exciting part of the year as an almond grower here in the Central Valley of California during bloom. Now, before we get started, I need to go over something real quick because you're going to hear me use two different words interchangeably that mean the same thing. A lot of people call these almond trees. A lot of people call these almond trees. Those two words are the same thing. We have a little joke in the industry that when we shake the trees at harvest, we knock the letter L out of the word almond and it becomes almonds. So you're going to hear me say almonds and you're going to hear me say almonds, but I'm talking about the same thing. So let's get into what happens to trees during bloom. After harvest during the winter, like most trees that you'll see around town or in your yards, they go dormant, which means they just go to sleep. They lose all their leaves. We've harvested them and they're storing carbohydrates to get ready for the next year. And that's where we're at right now. We are right smack dab in the middle of almond bloom. It's the prettiest time of the year. And this is the time of year that as almond growers, we can make or break our crop. And so all of these trees are covered in these beautiful, beautiful white blooms ready to be pollinated by bees. And bloom typically starts right around the middle of February. We like to say the flowers start coming out on Valentine's Day. That's when these trees start to wake up and start blooming. Now there's different stages of bloom. And if we can zoom in here, the very first stage of bloom when these buds start to wake up is what we call pink bud. And you can see these blooms have swollen, and just the little tips of those blossom petals have come out, and they have a little pink tinge to them. And so we call that pink bud. As the temperatures warm up and those buds have been popping out for a couple of days, they open up to these very beautiful flowers, which you see all over the trees. And that's what we call full bloom. That's when those bees are ready to come in and and pollinate these flowers. And we'll
Hey,
get
Nick,
back to bees.
I
Yes.
already have a question for you.
Okay.
Emiliano wants to know, how long does it take to grow an almond tree? And then someone else wants to know, how old are the trees that you're standing next to?
Okay, so almond trees, they take about the first, when they are 3 years old is the first year that we actually start harvesting almonds for them. So the first 2 years, we're just growing them, getting them big. And then year 3 is when we can start actually pollinating and harvesting the almonds. And they typically live to be about 25 years old. These particular trees that we're in front of right now are 16 years old.
Thank you.
That's a great question. So we have an almond blossom that is fully open, and it's ready to be pollinated by bees. And we need bees to pollinate these trees. And we're going to get back to that in a second. But I want to show you the last stage of almond bloom. We have pink bud, we have full bloom. And if we come over here, I'm actually going to be able to show you a flower, almond flower that has been pollinated and fertilized. And this is at petal fall. There's no more petals on the leaves. And we actually have a little almond starting to grow inside. And that's the start of our almond growing season.
That's awesome. I have a couple more questions for you, Nick.
Okay.
Jamie wants to know, how many almonds are normally on a tree?
That's a good question. It can vary from year to year. The number can vary from year to year, but in terms of pounds, we can get anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds of actual almonds on a tree. And depending on the different varieties and the different sizes, those numbers can fluctuate quite a bit. That's a good question.
Awesome.
The other thing that comes right after bloom or in that petal fall when those almonds start growing is you can see a little bit of green on these trees, and we're actually starting to have the leaf buds start to push as well. And so right now is the time that we're pollinating. Little baby almonds are starting to form that have been pollinated and fertilized, and we also have green leaves that are starting to form, and they're going to start photosynthesizing and making food for the tree. Another question that you might want to know, how many trees are in an actual acre of almond trees? And we typically will plant anywhere from 120 to 150 trees in an orchard. And so a typical year, we might get actually about 3 to 3,500 pounds of actual almonds on an acre.
That's awesome. I have a question that came in from one of our students. They want to know, do all of the trees bloom at once?
That's a great question. So almond trees will typically bloom pretty much at the same time, give or take 2 to 5 days. We have different varieties in each almond orchard. And a variety is kind of like when you eat peaches, there's some peaches that are early in the season, some peaches ripen later in the season. Those are different varieties. Well, in almonds, we have the exact same thing. And we have 3 different varieties planted in each orchard. And that is because almond trees can't pollinate themselves in general for the most part. They need other varieties of trees in the orchard as well for bees to cross-pollinate. And so that leads us into bees. In the almond industry, we cannot grow almonds without bees. We bring bees in from all over the United States. We have bees here on our farm from Texas, from Oregon, from Washington, and from Idaho. And right before bloom happens at the end of January, trucks bring thousands and thousands and thousands of hives into the state of California just for almond blossom. And those bees have been kept over the winter, probably cold up there in Washington and Oregon, and they get down here to California, and it's, you know, it's nice and warm, and they're excited to get out and work. And so when we start to get almond bloom, those bees just are voracious, and they go pollinating. What they'll do is they'll land on each flower, and they will transfer the pollen. They'll get the pollen all over their bodies, on their legs, and they'll fly from flower to flower, from tree to tree, variety to variety, and they cross pollinate. And that is the way that we get almonds to grow and to get pollinated and fertilized.
One of our questions has come over from YouTube Live, and it says, do some trees fail to bloom? And so I think we could also talk about, do some trees fail to bloom, and then maybe what % of those blooms turn into actual almonds?
Right. So trees don't typically fail to bloom. They always do. Some years we have more bloom than others, and there's a lot of different factors that contributed to that from the previous year. The only time a tree won't bloom is if it's really sick and it's dead and dying. But for the most part, trees will always bloom. Some years there's a lot more than other bloom, but there's lots of conditions that can cause that. In terms of how many blooms set on a tree, that can differentiate between year and year. It really depends on how much bee activity we have. Now, you're going to listen to a couple beekeepers later explain this, but it has to be a certain temperature for the bees to get out and fly. They like it warm. And so times of the year when we're in bloom and we have a lot of rain, bees don't like to fly in rain. They don't like to fly in lots of wind, and they don't like to fly when it's cold. So a year like this, when it's nice and warm during bloom, we have a lot of bee activity, and they're pollinating a lot. And we might get 15 to 20% of the blooms actually get pollinated and set a nut. There's other years where it rains during bloom the whole time, and we don't get a lot of bee activity, and so less of those almond blossoms are actually pollinated. That's a great question.
Oh, and someone to skirt tail on that, someone wants to know over on YouTube Live, wants to know, how long does almond blossom last?
All right, great question. So almond blossom typically lasts about 2 weeks, from about the time that we're in pink bud to the time where we have petal fall and there's no more blossoms on the tree. It's usually 2 to 3 weeks. Some years it can be a little longer than others. It depends on environmental conditions, how warm it is, how much rain we have. But in general, we have some sort of almond bloom for about 2 to 3 weeks.
Awesome.
Now, going back to bees, I told you that we bring them in from all over the country in hives, and we put out 2 beehives for every acre of almonds that we have. And your beekeepers that we're going to go to next are going to tell you about how many bees are in each hive. But that's typically what we'll set out, and we want to make sure there's plenty of bees to work in all these blooms. In the middle of the day when it's nice and warm, I can come out here in the middle of an orchard in the middle of full bloom, and you can just stand there, and the sound of all the bees zipping around is just music to my ears, because I know that they're out there working. And we rent these bees, and they cost quite a bit. In fact, for us to bring bees in from all over the country, it is about 15 to 20% of our annual cost that we're spending just on bees. So I think that's important to understand how important and what it costs us this time of year. This is our bread and butter. This is where we make or break our almond crop for the year. Some years are great, like last year, we had a really good warm bloom, and some years it's cold and rainy and we don't get as much crop. Another thing that's very important is that when bees come in here from all over the United States, this is their first chance to really strengthen up their hive. They're going to come in our hives and have a certain number of bees, but when they leave, they've gotten so much food from all of these healthy almond blooms that they've actually brooded and made thousands and thousands and thousands of more bees, that when they leave our orchards in a few weeks, they're going to go to other crops, and those hives are going to be so much stronger.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like we have a few things to review. So, almond blossom takes place mid-February, correct? That's when we start.
That's
And
correct.
then it takes, in order for us to get almonds and for an almond to be fertilized, we have to have pollination. So, bees or wind move pollen from one almond blossom to another. So, pollination is the transfer of pollen from one male part of a bloom to a female part of a bloom, which enables fertilization, which is just then what happens is we get those baby almonds like you showed us. But
That's correct.
not all of those blooms, they're really pretty and we have thousands of blooms on the trees, but we may only get 15 to 20% of those to fertilize to become almonds. That's really important for us to know, and it takes bees to make that happen, right?
That's right. The bees don't always visit all the flowers, and sometimes the pollen doesn't get down all the reproductive parts and actually fertilize. So, um, the more bees and the better weather and the more blooms we have, the bigger chance we have of getting more almonds.
Awesome. Well, I know you and other farmers don't actually own your bees. You rent them, like you said, and it costs you quite a bit to do it. I actually have a couple of friends that I know from Manteca Unified who are student beekeepers. So if it's okay with you, Nick, I think that we might have a chat with the beekeepers and come back to learn what farmers do after almond blossom happens and after we have that. So keep in mind, kids, if you're following along on your worksheet, bloom starts in mid-February. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from one male part of a flower to the female part, which enables fertilization, and only 15 to 20% of those blooms turn into almonds. And so I think now what you guys probably want to see is some bees and how all of that works and what beekeepers do. So we're actually going to take a little trip to Manteca Unified and see some of our student beekeepers. Hi, guys. Good morning to Belle and Grayson.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm Belle. I go to East Union High School and I am part of the bee co-op here. This is my friend Grayson, and we're going to be talking to you guys about some bees today. We raise bees for many things, actually, but one of the most important things about bees is pollination of produce. We use them for things that we eat every day. Also, important factor about bees is that they create honey. So, how honey is made by bees is first when it's nice in spring where all the flowers are growing, bees go and collect pollen. They go to each of these flowers and blooms, and with their fuzzy bodies, this pollen sticks to them. And when they go back and forth to these flowers collecting pollen, they give pollen also to other flowers. And with that, they bring home their own pollen that they have collected and turn it into honey. And when there's no more flowers, they use that honey that they made and eat it and use it to keep themselves fed. But people also love to eat honey too because it is a substitution for many sugars and it's really good tasting.
Hello, my name is Grayson Roman, as she already introduced. I'm going to be talking about bee boxes. When you get a bee box, they start off in a nook, which is about 3 pounds, and has one queen in it. These are very small hives, about 4 frames in them, well, three, including a feeder in them. The feeder consists of water or sugar water. It feeds the bees. Once we get that box, we usually get them from a bee breeder. We take them back and we put them in bigger boxes, as you can see behind me. These bigger boxes consist of 10 frames, which has artificial plastic on it, which looks like comb. So the bees could build their comb on and put their brood in, or honey. When we get the nook, we transfer the bees into the hive. Each box consists of 10 frames. So as you can see here, there's 2 boxes, so that would be 20 frames. So each hive consists of 20 to 80,000 bees per hive. As you can see, all of the bees. Okay, as we're opening this beehive, as you can see, this is the lid that we're about to lift off. So this is the lid, and then this piece of wood you see here is the inner lid, as we're about to lift off. As you can see on top of this inner lid are worker bees and maybe a few drones. In the frames you see here, there are brood, honey, and pollen. As we're lifting up this frame, you might see some honey and pollen. There are worker bees, drones, and then there's a queen bee. The worker bee's job is to take care of the brood and collect pollen. The drone's job is to be with the queen bee so she can reproduce. And the queen bee's job is to lay eggs. As you can see, there are lots and lots of worker bees. All over that frame, you can see some capped honey and comb.
As you just saw, the bees kind of got a little mad because we were trying to show you guys the brood and the honey. And the reason why they get all mad is because they're trying to protect their home. It's their home. They have their babies there. They have their food there. The reason why a lot of people are scared of bees is because people get stung. Well, it's because the bees think that they're trying to harm them. They're not doing it on purpose. They're scared. And that's why beekeepers wear suits is so when we do open up our hives and they get a little cranky, they don't sting us. So they're made out of this thick canvas where their stingers can't get through and hurt our skin. And typically when a bee stings, they die. So they don't want to sting you. They're scared and they're trying to protect themselves and their hive. Us as beekeepers, we come out once a week and check our hives for many things, for mites and waxworm especially. Mites and waxworm actually kill the bees typically and take over the hives. So we want to check that to make sure that they don't die. And especially at the moment, honeybees and bees of all kinds are actually dying because of many unknown reasons. Bees are actually going endangered at the moment, and we need to do our best to keep them safe. So, when you see a bee, don't kill it, just stand still, and they won't sting you. We as beekeepers try our best to keep care of bees so that they can pollinate almonds and other foods alike.
Wow, thank you guys for sharing. I think all of us learned a little bit of something about bees, and I actually have a lot of student questions for you guys. So one of our students wants to know over on YouTube Live, how many flowers will a bee visit each day?
Well, that is a very good question. About 2,000 flowers a bee will visit each day.
Awesome. Lots of our students. Tayden wants to know, why do you guys keep bees?
We keep bees for many reasons, but some of the main reasons are to obviously pollinate our flowers and trees and vegetables and such. Another thing is to create wax for candles, and about 80% of the foods that you eat have been pollinated by a bee.
Interesting.
We also collect honey from bees too, because they make honey.
Awesome. We have a student, actually several students want to know, are you guys afraid of being stung by bees?
Yes and no, yes and no. Because when a bee stings you, it releases venom. So that venom hurts really bad, pretty much. So you don't really want to get stung by a bee, but also when you get stung by a bee, the bee dies, and we don't really want bees to die due to the situation they're in right now.
Got ya. And oh, someone wants to know, where does the queen bee go?
The queen bee goes into the center of the hive to lay her brood and have new baby bees.
Yeah, we have several students who want to know how many bees. Can you guys remind them how many bees are in each of those hives or boxes?
There's about 20,000 to 80,000 bees per hive.
Cool. Hey, someone else on Zoom, a teacher is asking for a student. How do they, oh, Scarlett, looks like Scarlett's the student. How do bees make honey? And then how do you guys get it out of the hive? Or do you get it out of the hive?
Bees make honey from pollen. So how we get it out of the hive, well, how they make honey, they eat pollen, which they take from flowers, and then they spit it up, which turns into honey. So they spit it into these combs, and it becomes cap honey, as you saw. And when we take the frames that have honey on them out of the hive, and we take them apart in many ways. We can use machines, or we can just cut them up and take the comb and put them in jars, because some people like to eat them that way with comb on.
Awesome. We have a student over on our YouTube page, and he or she has a very good question. They want to know, there are queen bees. Does that mean there are also king bees?
No. Well, technically there are for a while. There are drones, which are boy bees who stay in the hive for a little while to mate with the queen, and they fertilize her so that she can create more baby bees. But as soon as she is fertilized to lay her eggs and hatch her larvae, the drones are kicked out of the hive.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Someone else wants to know, how long do bees live over on YouTube Live?
Bees live as long up to 2 to 5 years.
Wow, that's a long time. But we don't want to kill them, right? We don't want to step on them or squish them or anything like that, because they're actually becoming endangered. And then what would we do? Then we'd be in a real pickle, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm looking at all these questions. Oh, someone on YouTube Live wants to know, when pollen is collecting, does it hurt the bees when they go and go get the pollen and transfer that and do pollination? Does that hurt them?
No,
not at all.
Gotcha. Lily, oh, another question. I have time for a couple more bee questions. It looks like Lily wants to know, are bees scared of water?
No, they actually drink water. There are feeders actually in most hives that are filled with water or sugar water to keep them hydrated and keep going and collecting pollen.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Okay. It looks like Connor wants to know, how do you get all the bees together back in the box?
So pretty much how we get them all back into the box. So when it gets about around nighttime, they all come back to the box, because the sun's going down, it's getting dark, they won't be able to see, so they go all back into the hive.
And bees like it warm, right? Well, they don't like anything below like 50 degrees. Bees like it warm. So they go out in the day and pollinate and do their thing, visit up to 20,000, or excuse me, up to 2,000 flowers. So I have a question. If they are going to pollinate that many blossoms, how far do they travel from the hive?
Up to 5 miles.
Wow, that's pretty far. And how fast? Do you know how fast they travel?
Yes, they travel up to 15 miles per hour.
Oh my gosh, that seems like a lot. It seems pretty fast to me for a bee. Okay, we actually we have an abundance of students who are very concerned for you guys as beekeepers, and they want to know if you've ever been stung.
Yes.
I've only been stung twice. So,
but it doesn't, you're not afraid, right? Because you have your bee suits. And my understanding from what you guys mentioned is that the bees are only stinging and kind of getting aggressive because they're afraid and they're trying to protect their hives, right? That's why they sting you.
Yep.
Gotcha. Well, that's good to know. So you guys have told us that bees are actually a really good pest or bug, if you will, and that we should do everything that we can to protect them. So what I'm wondering then is, are all bugs and pests good or just bees? Like, I'm wondering how that works. And I'm actually curious. I have a friend named Plant Dr. Rick, and I'm wondering if he can help us kind of understand, are all pests good or some bugs better than others, and how that works. We've learned that bees are really important and produce a lot of our food and fiber, but maybe Rick can help us. Rick, are you able to hear me? And do you think you can answer that question? Are all of our bugs good, and how do we manage them, and what happens? What happens when we have after pollination, and how does that work?
Well, we've got a lot of things that in that question that are difficult to answer all at the same time. But yes, all bugs are good. Some of them just do different things, but they tend to be a food source for other bugs and can be really beneficial in the long run. So I'm a plant doctor and my name's Rick. Plants need doctors just the same as we need doctors, and our pets need doctors, veterinarians, but plants can't come in and see me when they feel ill. So I have to go out and visit them. My office is my truck, and I drive around and check lots of different fields and different crops to make sure that they're healthy and well. On our next slide, the reason I do this is because all the people who live in cities like San Francisco here, they can't feed themselves. They can't produce enough food and fiber on their rooftops and around the city in order to feed everybody. So like Farmer Nick and a lot of other farmers out here in the valley, we have to produce that food and then ship it to them into the supermarkets and stores and clothing stores so that they can buy it and have lots of fresh food and nice clothes to wear. On our next slide, the other thing is that plant doctors work in a lot of different areas. We don't just work in agriculture. We also produce flowers and house plants and things along those lines. So our job is really to deal with all the different plants that are out there and try and keep them healthy and growing strong. On our next slide, one of the things that I do is I take care of insects. We do insect control. Now, in the top left of this slide, you see a bug there, and that's called a mosquito. And only female mosquitoes bite. They need the blood from you, me, and other animals in order to make more mosquitoes. But they're also the most dangerous animal in the world because they spread lots of different diseases. One of them that we have here in California is called the West Nile virus. And so if you see any mosquitoes that are out flying during the day, you got to be real careful of those, because those ones are the ones that spread the West Nile virus. And we want to make sure that we're taking care of those and not letting them get and bite us. Now in the lower right, just like that mosquito bites and takes blood out of us, that bug in the lower right picture is called an aphid. And aphids do exactly the same thing to plants that mosquitoes do to us. They bite the plant, they suck the blood out of the plant. Plants have blood just like us. We just call it sap most of the time. But they'll take that out, and they can also spread diseases to plants. So we really want to be careful when we have aphids on our flowers, our roses, or on our crops, because they can spread diseases to those, and then those plants won't grow up healthy and strong. We won't be able to harvest them and eat them and get all the nutrients out of them that we need. On the next slide, I've got 4 different pictures. These are all good bugs, believe it or not. And you guys saw the picture. You just heard about honeybees and how they make almonds, but they also make cherries and cantaloupes and walnuts, or not walnuts, excuse me, but watermelons. And about, as the beekeeper said, 80% of our food and fiber come from the honeybees. We need them to make all of that stuff for us. And by fiber, I mean, all of us are wearing a plant today. Did you guys know that? You're wearing a plant called cotton. And without bees, we wouldn't even have cotton or the clothes that we're wearing. So it's really important to have those guys around, or young ladies, excuse me, because all bees are female except for one time a year. Now in the upper right corner, that's a praying mantis. And
hey, Plant Dr. Rick, I actually have a question from Tayden, and I know you're all about interaction. So Tayden wants to know,
perfect.
How do you know if the trees are not good?
How do I know if the trees are not good? We'll get to that too in a little bit later. I'll show you some pictures, but plants show us when they don't feel well. In the case of, there was a question earlier about how many flowers are on a tree. If the tree's not feeling well, it won't produce a lot of flowers, or the leaves will be too small, or they'll be different colors. And so that's how they show us. And then we have to take samples of that to figure out what is exactly wrong. We use a lot of science and a lot of analysis in order to figure out how to keep those trees healthy and what food they need to grow up big and strong so that they produce food for us. Now, going back to the picture of that praying mantis, when I was young, I used to keep these as pets. And I don't know if you guys have ever done that either, but they're really neat. You can feed them flies and butterflies and all sorts of things, and they'll be a nice pet to hang around, and they eat all sorts of bugs out in the garden. So when I'm out in the orchards and in fields and I see lots of praying mantises out there, I don't want to do anything that might upset them because they're helping control the insects that might be harming my crop. Down in the lower left, there's a picture of what we call a green lacewing. And we call it that because its wings are really fragile, like lace, and they have those little veins going through them. And the bug is green. So as farmers and plant doctors, we try and describe things just by what they look. So it's a green lacewing. Now, as an adult, like the picture there, it only flies around and sucks nectars out of flowers. But its babies they look like little alligators with big pinchers in front of them. And those pinchers are hollow like straws. And they'll go up to an aphid, they'll stab the aphid, suck all the juice out of the aphid, throw it over their shoulder and go on and eat another one. And they'll do that to over 200 aphid a day. So I really want to keep those around in the orchard or on my crops because they eat so many of those aphids, which could spread diseases to my crop. In the bottom right corner, it's a big picture of a spider, right? Well, when I took that picture, my sons and I had actually kept that alive, and she had a web that was all the way across like one of these orchard rows. And she was about this big when she was full grown. And we were feeding it butterflies and flies and everything. And even though spiders can be scary, they're really good out in an orchard or in a field because they eat lots and lots of the bugs that might be harming my crop. So I want to keep those around and don't do anything to scare them off. Now, I don't really like them in my house, like black widows and that, but they do a great job of controlling bugs that might spread diseases to us or to my crops. So I keep them around as best I can. On our next slide, we have a picture of a ladybug or a ladybird beetle, which is its correct name.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
Someone wants to know over on YouTube Live, how many plant doctors are there?
There's over 4,000 plant doctors working in California, and that's for 11 million acres of crops. So there's not a whole lot of us out here, and we have to be licensed by the state and take a test and go to college in order to be able to do what we do. And there's actually 8 different licenses we have in order to take care of crops.
Awesome. I have one more question while I have you on there. They want to know, what do bees do around mosquitoes?
What the bees do around mosquitoes? Well, mosquitoes fly at night and in the morning really early or late in the afternoon. So bees and mosquitoes don't really hang out in the same spots. So they go at different times of day. Bees fly during the day because they need to be able to see, and they use the sun to find out where the flowers are and where the fields are. Mosquitoes, they actually see our breath. They have a different eye, and they can see when we exhale, and that's when they know where to go find us to bite us.
Got you. Thank you.
Going back to this picture of the ladybug, somewhere along the lines, somebody had said that if a ladybug has spots or doesn't have spots, it's a boy or a girl ladybug. Well, that's not really true. We don't know by looking at a ladybug whether it's a boy or a girl ladybug. Just because it has spots or doesn't have spots, or it's a different color. There can be gray ladybugs, there can be purple ladybugs, they can have red spots and orange spots. They can be any color but green. If you see anything that's green with spots, that's actually called a cucumber beetle. And that its favorite food is eating cucumbers. So we don't want to do anything that might harm, or we want to take care of those bugs. We don't want them to eat our pickles and our cucumbers. But as far as ladybugs go, we won't know if it's a boy or a girl unless we dissect them, which means we have to open them up and look at their insides, which kills the ladybug. So we don't want to do that. Now, ladybugs are really neat in that both as an adult, like in the picture, and as a larvae, they eat over 200 ladybugs a day, or it's not ladybugs, excuse me, aphids a day. And so we want to really keep those around. That's why we actually sell ladybugs to people who have gardens and organic growers so that they'll go in and control all the aphids that might be on those crops. On our next picture, we use a lot of different.
Wants to know, how did the ladybug get its name if they're not all ladies?
That is a darn good question, and I really don't know that answer. It's called a ladybird beetle, and I can't answer that one. But I tell you what, I'll go find out, and I will get back to Ag Ventures and let you know.
Okay, and final question about ladybugs. Can they swim?
They can, but they really don't like to. They're not very strong swimmers. And so like if you'll see them in your pool, they'll try and get to the side of the pool and climb out, dry off, and fly away. They have wings underneath those red shells in there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So as a plant doctor, I use lots of different tools to see what bugs are out there. In this particular slide, we're using a sweep net to collect both the good bugs and the bad bugs. And this particular field is called alfalfa. You know, and cows eat alfalfa, turns into milk and cheese and all those good things that we like. So, and ice cream. And so we collect the good bugs and the bad bugs in that sweep net, and we see how many bad bugs there are in comparison to the good bugs. If there's enough good bugs out there to control the bad bugs, we don't want to do anything that would harm that and let Mother Nature take care of all those bad bugs. But if there's too many bad bugs for the good bugs, then we might have to do something to control those. On our next slide, this is a picture of what's called a cabbage looper. I bet you can figure out what its favorite food is. It's cabbage. And so if I don't control the cabbage looper on this next slide, you can see what it does to a head of cabbage. Now, not just is that cabbage got holes in it and it's not going to be very good, it'll also taste bad because the cabbage, we found out, cabbage and plants actually talk to each other. And when they're under attack by a bug, they'll change their flavor so that that bug doesn't think that they're good tasting and will try and leave. Then they'll also send a smell out to their neighbors to say, hey, I'm under attack by a bug, change your flavor too so you don't get eaten. So we wouldn't want to make coleslaw or fish tacos with this cabbage, right? So because it wouldn't taste good and there wouldn't be enough food in it for us to find, get all of our nutrients out of, so to make us big and strong. So what I'll do if I find a cabbage like this or with a lot of bugs on it like that worm, on the next slide, I'll mix what's called a pesticide. A pesticide is nothing more than a medicine like you and I take when we're ill. We mix it with water and we spray it on the leaves of the crop in order to control the disease or the bugs that are on that crop, so that, like in the next slide, we have beautiful cabbage that's full of nutrients and it's good to eat and tastes good.
I have another question for you. Jamie wants to know, are you employed by one farmer or many farmers?
I work with lots of different farmers. I actually work for a company that farmers can't, just like we have to have our doctors write us prescriptions. I have to write a prescription to like Farmer Nick when I find out that his field is sick, and let him know, hey, you have to go and get that medicine, the pesticide, in order to control your crop. And I tell him how to apply it, when to apply it, how much to apply, and how often to apply, just like your doctor does when he has a prescription for you, of what pills to take, how often, and with food or with water or what have you. So I work with a lot of different ones. I don't work with just one.
Okay, and YouTube Live has a question. They want to know, how many plants do you take care of?
Well, there's over 400 different crops grown in California. And I can say that I've worked with over 50 of those intensely, which means that I know them from the beginning when they're seeds all the way to when they're harvested. But I have lots of people who work with me that handle all the other ones, the flowers. I'm not that strong on flowers, but turf and football fields and almonds and cherries and apricots and all those wonderful things.
Awesome, thank you.
So on my next slide, I have a picture of Disneyland. Why do you think I have a picture of Disneyland? Well, at one time, Disneyland had over 13 plant doctors taking care of all the different plants on Disneyland. So that way, Disneyland always looked really neat. Just think of it this way. If there was some grass underneath Mickey's nose there, wouldn't that look really weird? It'd be like he had hair coming out of his nose. Or maybe some of those flowers to the right or the left of him were dead, and it wouldn't be that picture of Disneyland. Or some of the trees were dead in the what was it, Magic Forest or what have you. So there's plant doctors who take care of the crops and the fields and the cities, parks, and those things to help make things look the way they want them to look, or the way we think they should look. Now, on my next slide, I have a picture of a little boy who's sick. Well, plants can get sick for the same reason that we get sick. The only difference is they're out in the weather and they can't go inside. So it's my job to watch and make sure that they don't get a disease like on this next slide. The peach on the left there has a disease called brown rot, and and gray mold, that gray stuff on top of it, that will spread in the wind and infect other peaches, and they all get mushy and gross, and we won't eat them. And then like on the picture of the roses there, that's called mildew. And that'll actually cause that flower not to bloom right. And the rose won't look like the pretty roses that we want to buy in the stores and give to our moms and boys or girlfriends and such. So again, I'll make a prescription for what we call a fungicide to take care of those two diseases, and so that we get a beautiful crop that's healthy for us, or that's beautiful that we can sell and make money off of. On my next slide, the last thing I do with crops is I also handle their fertilizer or their food that they eat. And I use a lot of different tools there to make sure that they're all good and healthy and they're getting the right food, so that we harvest them, we get all the necessary nutrients out of them. So on my next slide, you'll see a picture of corn plants, and the ones in front are kind of really yellow. The ones in back are green. Well, just like we need iron in our blood to make it nice and dark red, crops need iron. In this case, the yellow ones, they need more iron to make them nice and dark green, so they can harvest the energy from the sun and grow up big and strong and make corn ears that we get to harvest, and we can have tortilla chips and all sorts of wonderful things from them.
I have several questions from our YouTube channel. So we have a student who wants to know, what is your favorite plant to take care of?
I really like almonds, especially at this time of year. I used to be a farmer as well, and I used to work with a ranch that we had 10,000 acres of almonds. And so I really like it at this time of the year, and I like eating them right off the tree. They're really tasty at that point.
Okay, someone else wants to know, how many places do you go to a day to check on plants?
Oh, it depends on the time of year, but let's say in June, I will visit somewhere between 20 and 40 different fields to see how the fields are doing.
Okay, and then, it looks like some of our students missed, and they're probably following along like excellent students on their worksheet. They want to know if you can repeat how many plant doctors were employed at Disneyland.
Disneyland had over 13 at one time.
Okay, and final question. They want to know, did you go to a special school to learn to be a plant doctor?
Yeah, I did. There's a school in Fresno and a school in San Luis Obispo. I went to the one in San Luis Obispo called Cal Poly. UC Davis also makes plant doctors, and any of the agricultural schools will have a degree for plant doctors.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. On my next slide, I have a picture of a baseball park. And the reason I have that is because plant doctors take care of baseball parks and football fields and those kind of things. Just think about how much that football player or that baseball player makes. And what if there was a gopher hole outside? Because plant doctors also take care of rodents and try and keep them out of fields. And if that baseball player were to trip and break his ankle, or even just hurt himself in that baseball field, how much that owner or those people would not be able to pay to have him play. So we do a lot of different things. Baseball fields, football fields are just as important as the crops that we grow out here in the field. But on the last slide here, I've got a picture of a produce section of a supermarket. For me, and what I like to do, I like to help make sure that there's lots of food when you guys go to the supermarket, or your mom and dad, and lots of healthy food to choose from, so that you get to grow up big and strong. It's all great and tasty.
Okay, you ready for some more questions? The students are very interested in what you're talking about, which is awesome. Okay, so Christine wants to know, are pesticides dangerous to humans?
They can be, just like our medicines can be. If you take too much of them, you can get sick, right? Well, pesticides, if you take too much or we put too much out there, it can be dangerous to humans. But we do our best to make sure that what we apply to the orchards are as safe to us as it is to the crop.
Got ya. Jaslyn wants to know, is Plant Dr. Rick allergic to pollen?
I'm not allergic to pollen, so I don't really have allergies like a lot of people do, but I am allergic to bee stings. And so I have to be really careful when I'm out in the orchards, especially at this time of year, to make sure that I don't make any of those bees mad at me. I don't like to get stung. I have to actually carry a pen around just in case I do, so that I can make it to the hospital.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that, because one of our students was asking in the chat, can you die from a bee sting? And that was my response, was if you're allergic to it. So to those asking, Plant Dr. Rick is a perfect example of, yes, you can die from a bee sting if you are allergic. But he has, like you said, a special pin that he keeps with him to help take care of that. Okay, some more questions. It looks like Hooney wants to know, how long do plants live?
It depends on the crop. Some of our crops we can harvest with, like spinach, we will harvest within 30 days. On almonds, 25 years. On walnuts, I've taken care of walnuts that are over 65 years old. So it depends on the different type of crop as to what we're trying to do.
Sue wants to know, won't the pesticides kill the bees and the ladybug? Oh, I'm sorry, that came from her student Amelia.
Okay, when bees are in the orchard, like right now, we do not apply pesticides when the bees are in the orchard. So we will actually spray during the night when the bees are not active, so that we don't hurt the bees or chase them off. We'll even use chemicals that, that don't scare them away because of the smell. And we'll even add additional ones to maybe make the bees visit during the daylight hours so that they visit more of the flowers that are there.
Okay, over on YouTube Live, we have some questions. How do you keep worms out of almonds?
We do a lot of monitoring. We use things called pheromone traps, and I believe you'll see a picture a little bit later of what those are, but they have a special perfume in them that only attracts the male moths, and we catch those and count them, and we make sure that there's not too many flying around, because the female moths will lay eggs, and those eggs will turn into worms and eat the almonds. So we do our best to make sure that there's not so many moths out there that they might turn into worms and lay eggs on the almonds. And if they do, then we apply a pesticide to help control them.
Okay,
because once they're inside the almond, we can't do anything about them. They're protected.
Okay, so it's more of a preventative measure.
No, we have to find when they're there.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
we do control the ones that are there. We don't just apply pesticides because we want to. They're really, really expensive. And Farmer Nick doesn't want to pay anything more than he has to in order to produce his crop.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, our students are very interested in what you're doing. One of our students on YouTube Live wants to know, how long have you been a plant doctor and how old do you have to be?
You have to go to college. Well, you don't necessarily have to go to college, but most of our plant doctors are 21 years or older, because they have to do a fair amount of school. You have to have certain college level courses and take the test in order to become a plant doctor. So there is some schooling involved. So you've got to get out of high school and go and take some college. And how old am I? I'm 50 years old, or 57, excuse me. And I've been doing this job for over 30 years.
Okay. Look, we have a time for a couple more questions. It looks like it looks like Amelia, we have a couple of other students can you just give us a refresher? I know you touched on it a little bit, but pesticides and things that we put in our orchards, they're asking if they're bad, just in general. So I think maybe just some further explanation about them and their use and how we use them would be great.
Pesticides are not bad. We need them just like we need medicines to make us healthy when we get sick. In fact, I bet that every single one of you have used a pesticide this morning. If you brushed your teeth or if you took a shower and used soap, those are pesticides. And they do, but they don't harm you, right? So the same thing out in the field, we only use them when we need them. And so it's just on how much you use and when you use it, as if there's an issue.
Gotcha. Okay. I think we're going to do one more question and then we're going to go back to talk to Farmer Nick about what he does after almond blossom. So let's see. Okay. So we're trying to prevent or help trees and plants that are sick, but someone on YouTube Live wants to know, when a tree is sick and dies, what do we do with it?
Sometimes it gets chopped up and turned into firewood. Other times it gets ground up and put back into the orchard as food for the next crop that comes in, or the next set of trees. So in fact, I think Farmer Nick has got a row over here next to where I'm presenting that they've done that. They've chopped up all the trimmings from the tree, and it's going to be turned into food by the bugs and the organisms in the soil, so that the crop gets to eat it and it continues to grow.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I know based on the amount of interaction we had here that our students really appreciated and enjoyed your presentation, and it looks like they learned a lot. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for kind of talking about what plant doctors do. And I will let everyone know, just since we didn't mention it, Plant Dr. Rick is called a PCA, which is short for Pest Control Advisor. And so that's what the plant doctor's long formal name is PCA, or Pest Control Advisor. So I think at this point we should go back. We have a ton of questions about what happens after bloom and how long it takes to harvest and what the growing process is of almonds. And so Nick, if you have a few minutes to chat with us about what that looks like, I think our students would really appreciate and enjoy that. Are you able to hear us, Nick?
I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Awesome, we can. Okay, so if you can kind of talk to us about what happens. You showed us petal fall, you showed us the baby almond, but then what? What do we do after that?
Yeah, so let me, if you can zoom in on my hand here. What we're trying to do after bloom, as I showed you the baby almonds, we have 3 baby almonds here, and we're trying to grow them into these almonds, which we call almond kernels, and that's what you eat. So we got a lot to do in between after bloom and when we harvest. And the biggest, one of the 2 biggest things that we have to do, and Plant Dr. Rick touched on this, is we have to fertilize and we have to water. And the fertilizer is just like the vitamins that your mom and dad give you every day to keep you healthy. Well, these trees need those vitamins too, but we just call it fertilizer. And what that does is it helps the leaves grow up nice and healthy, which helps, take in the sun and create photosynthesis and create food for the tree, which just helps those almonds grow and get bigger all the way to harvest. So every week we're putting on a little bit of vitamins, or what we call fertilizer, every week in order to keep these trees as healthy as we can. And there's lots of different fertilizers that we use, like you might take vitamin C or vitamin D or vitamin B. Well, there's different fertilizers that we use, like nitrogen or potassium or zinc. And Plant Dr. Rick helps me decide how much of that fertilizer I need to use and what types of fertilizer I need to use. So that's one important thing we do after bloom. The other important thing we do is irrigate or water. Just like you guys need to water your lawn at home to keep it healthy and green and growing, well, we have to water these trees in order for them to keep growing healthy and produce a good crop. Now, how many of you know where we get water from? Do any of you like to go snow skiing or go up and sled or make snowmans up in the mountains? Well,
yes,
that snow.
Looks like some of them do.
Yeah, well, that snow up there is what us farmers in the Central Valley and all over depend on for water. When that snow melts in the spring, it goes into reservoirs, which we store water in, and it slowly makes its way down our rivers and into our canals, and it ends up coming out in our fields with pumps out of either sprinklers or drip hoses, drip irrigation systems, and different types of things. So this water that we actually are using on our trees comes all the way up from Sierra Nevada mountains in the form of snow.
And how much water? We are getting oodles and oodles of questions about how much water does it take for us to grow almonds or for you to grow almonds?
That's a great question. So when we talk about water in agriculture in general, we talk about, in terms of volume, the number of acre feet. Okay, and I'll make this as simple as I can. So an acre is about the size of a football field, okay? And 1 acre foot, if you can imagine a football field with 1 foot of water covering it, that's an acre feet of water. That's the volume. And it takes between 3 and 4 acre feet per year to grow a good, healthy crop of almonds. And we don't irrigate all the time. We irrigate to need. I have special probes that I put into the ground that I can actually monitor on my phone, and it tells me how wet the soil is and when these trees need to be irrigated. So I don't put on too much water or I don't put enough water on. It's kind of like you when you go out and play sports. There's certain times of the year where it's hotter and you're running around and you need to drink more water. Well, same thing for almond trees in the summertime. It's real hot and they're growing and they need more water. Other times of the year, it might rain or it's just cooler and they don't need as much water.
Gotcha. So someone wants, actually 2 people. We have someone on YouTube Live and Nicole joining us on Zoom. They want to know, is the orchard you're in organic?
No, this orchard is not organic. There is some organic orchards throughout California. They're becoming a little bit more popular, but almonds, because of the certain type of pests that we get, are fairly difficult to produce organically.
Oh, good to know. Oh, speaking of, how many kinds of almonds are there? So maybe if you can also kind of explain what we talk about as a variety, that'd be great. Looks like so you have some questions.
Sure, that's a good question. There are many different varieties. There's probably 20 to 25 different almond varieties just in the Central Valley of California, but there's probably only about 10 to 12 that we really grow in big numbers. And all of the different varieties, they look a little bit different. They're different sizes. They even taste a little bit different. And we use different varieties for different types of things. Some varieties are good in almond butter, in almond milk. Some varieties, like our most popular variety, the nonpareil, that one's good to just eat raw right off the tree, just like Plant Dr. Rick said. And so we grow probably 10 to 12 varieties that are very popular here in the Central Valley. And they actually, like I said earlier, they bloom at a little bit different time within a week of each other. But when it comes time to harvest, we actually harvest them at different times. I may have one variety that is ready to harvest, say September 1st. The second variety in my block may not be ready to harvest for another 3 weeks after that. And then the last variety, we have some that might not harvest for a month and a half after the very first variety. And remember why we need different varieties in almonds, because almonds cannot self-pollinate. They need different varieties for the bees to cross-pollinate. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have a crop. Now, in the last 10 years or so, the industry has developed a couple of varieties that are what are called self-fertile, that can actually pollinate themselves with the help of bees still going from flower to flower. What that does is it allows us to have the entire ranch be one variety, harvest at one time, and we're done. So that is becoming more and more popular. And then we don't have to depend on bees as much. So as those varieties, those self-fertile varieties begin to become more popular, our reliance on bees will be a little bit less than it is now.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. So you said the magic word, almond milk. So we have gotten, no exaggeration, probably 15 to 20 questions about how do you make almond milk? And can you kind of explain what that is for maybe those who don't know, or that's an unfamiliar term to them?
That's a good question. I do not know exactly how they make almond milk. You'll have to ask the producers of that. But there are almonds in it. It's basically made up of some almonds and water and some other ingredients.
But you're not out there like milking almonds like we would.
No.
Okay.
So to make almond milk, it's processed. They're harvested normally, just like we always do, and then they go through a process, just like any other food that is processed goes through, and they, turn them into powder and combine them with other ingredients to actually make milk.
Gotcha. Okay. So speaking of, we've also had since minute one, since you talked about the almond blossom, students want to know, how long does it take from that blossom to harvest? What does that process kind of look like? How long are we talking? When do we harvest them? And real brief, what is the processing portion?
Yeah, good question. So from bloom to harvest, remember, we start about mid-February and we start to harvest about mid-August. So that kind of gives you a time frame, and we're usually done with harvest out of the field by about Halloween. So it's a good, 6 to 8 months of growing.
Awesome. So for those of you guys following along, so it takes that long because, like Farmer Nick said, there's different varieties that bloom and then are ready for harvest at different times. So after petal fall, farmers need to water their crops, they need to fertilize their crops, and then they need to manage the pests in those orchards. So for those 6 to 8 months, Farmer Nick and other farmers like him are busy taking care of those things, just like your parents and caregivers make sure that you guys are happy, healthy, and fed. That's what Farmer Nick and his other fellow colleagues are doing, making sure they're taking care of their orchards and their trees so that they can produce affordable, safe, and abundant food for you guys. So at this point, we have some extra questions left. Nick, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, I think we should do some roundtable discussion because we have a lot of questions for you and our fellow panelists today.
That sounds good. Let's do that.
Okay, guys, if you guys can go ahead and group up just a little bit, but not too close. We don't want your microphones to sync up. So at this point, we're getting close to the end of our presentation, but I want to get to as many student questions as possible. So Nick, since we're started with you, let's go ahead and ask you a couple more questions.
Okay.
Farmer Nick, how tall are the trees that you're standing in, and how tall do they get?
Oh, these trees here are probably 15 to 20 feet tall. Almond trees, if they get older, when they're around 25 to 30 years old, they can be up to 30 or 35 feet tall.
Gotcha. How long until the almond stops growing? That's from Jessica.
So the almond will stop growing. It'll after bloom, it'll start growing really fast, and by about June, end of May, June is about the time that it is the actual size that it's going to be when we harvest it. And it's in that time period, it's like a jello inside. And then at the end of May and going into June, it actually, that jello turns hard and becomes the almond kernel that you're actually going to eat. So it reaches full size around May.
Okay. And then two more questions. One of our students wants to know if you can eat an almond directly from the tree.
Absolutely. That's like Plant Dr. Rick said, that's some of the best almond eating you can, fresh right off the tree. And during the spring and summer, as I'm going around, walking around in the orchards, I'm constantly picking them off and eating them.
Having a little snack as you go.
That's right.
I like it. Okay. And then one other question is a little bit different. So one of our students is thinking a little bit outside the box, and they want to know, does anyone ever try to steal your almonds?
We've never really had much of that problem out in the field. Every once in a while during harvest, we'll catch someone on the side of the road coming and scooping stuff up. But normally we don't have that problem. What we do have a lot, and especially this time of year, is you'll see people pulling off the side of the road and taking pictures because these orchards are so beautiful. It looks like these trees are covered with snow.
Gotcha. Okay. And then real quick, someone's asking how they're harvested. So can you real quick just talk about maybe the shaking and then sweeping and picking up, and then where does it go after?
Sure. So to harvest almonds, what we do is we have this machine we call a shaker. It's got a big arm, big claw, and it grabs the trunk and it shakes the tree really hard, and all of the almonds fall onto the ground. We then have a machine that's called a sweeper or a rake, and it sweeps them into a nice row right in the middle where we drive. And then another machine called a pickup machine or a harvester comes right over the top of that row and picks them up. And at that point, they get put into trucks and they go to a processor called a huller sheller, where they further take the hull and the shell off and get that meat that we like to eat.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I have some questions for our beekeepers. So beekeepers, we have some questions for you. I know that you guys have been trying to answer some of them in our chat for us, so I appreciate that. So Naomi wants to know, how many eggs does a queen lay?
A queen will lay about 2,000 a day, which is quite a lot of eggs.
That is quite a lot of eggs. Yeah, it is a lot of eggs. Okay. Oh, we have a couple of questions. Salvador wants to know, what is a drone bee?
A drone bee is a male bee, pretty much.
Okay. Let's see. We have a couple more. Oh, is there food in the box? Xavier would like to know.
Yes, the food is the honey that they make, and also the pollen that they collect and take back to the hive. They also eat that.
Okay, good to know. Oh, we have some very concerned students. What happens if bees go extinct?
I don't think we would have much food left, and I don't think there'd be many of us left, honestly.
Yeah, farmers,
bees make most of our food.
Most of our food and fiber. So we need to not only preserve and protect them, but do what we can to kind of make them like a safe little area, right? So that's why we have the beehives, and we try not to put them too close to the road, so that way no one runs into them and they have a safe area to grow our, that's the starting point of a lot of our food and fiber. So Hopefully we never get to that point, or farmers and agriculturalists are going to have to get real creative, it sounds like. Okay. Let's see. Oh, what happens when the queen bee dies?
So when a queen bee dies, she either makes a new, before she dies, she either puts a new baby in one of these, which we call a queen cap, or if she dies unexpectedly, we will have to buy a new queen or borrow another queen from a different hive.
Okay. Okay, we're running out of time, so let's go back to Plant Dr. Rick because we have some questions for you. Some students want to know, can ladybugs pollinate flowers too?
That's not really what they're designed to do. They eat other bugs. So it's the bees that pollinate flowers. The ladybugs help control all the bugs that might be damaging the plants. So they love aphids. That's their favorite food.
Gotcha. Ooh, favorite food. Okay, and then they also want to know, are bees, wasps, and black bees related?
They are members of a similar family. So yes, and some of the other bees will pollinate flowers also. They're just not as good at it as honeybees are.
Gotcha. Okay. Think that's, oh, someone wants to know, do you like being a plant doctor?
I love it. I've been doing it for 30 years. I get to be out in the open air. I have an office that I visit, but my office is actually out here in the fields.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That is going to wrap it up for us. I have some students who'd like me to go over the worksheet with them. So real quick, rapid fire to our students. Almond blossom begins in mid-February. Pollination is the transfer of pollen, which later enables fertilization. Only 15 to 20% of almond blossoms turn into almonds. It is false. Bees do not like cold weather. The 3 types of bees are worker, drone, and queen. Bees help make 80% of our food and fiber. At one point, Disneyland employed 13 plus plant doctors, and after petal fall, farmers have to water, fertilize, and manage pests in the orchard until harvest. So that concludes our trip. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys for sharing your expertise, for answering our student questions. And we had thousands upon thousands of our students taking an adventure in agriculture today, and we appreciate you joining us. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors, San Joaquin County, the San Joaquin County Agricultural Commissioner's Office, the Specialty Crop Block Grant, the Cal Ag Plate Grant, of course, Travail and Thurman, Wilbur Ellis, Manteca Unified Bee Co-op. Thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate it. All of our sponsors are listed on our website, so please go review that, give them your patronage a thank you if you can. If you're looking for new events, specifically those of you from Lodi Unified, if you normally go to the Lodi Ag Venture, so Lodi, Linden, New Hope, Oakview, this is not your Ag Venture event. Please go register for your actual Ag Venture event. That'll take place on March 10th. This is just a bonus event for all of our students that we're happy to provide. Those recordings from this will always be posted a couple of days after on our website. So if you're looking at any time for an Ag Venture field trip, a virtual trip, please go visit that page. Alternatively, we also have some presentations. So those of you who are not 3rd grade teachers, you may want a little bit more content. So if you go to our website, which is now up on your screens, www.sjcagventure.com, and go to our presentations or field trips tab. That has presentations over various commodities, most of them specialty crops, also dairy. It also includes a virtual tour of our county to highlight over 20 different agricultural commodities that we grow here. So I highly encourage you guys to go view those if you haven't. We just want to thank you guys for being here. Those of you on Zoom, you are going to get a link as soon as you're done to a survey. Please take that, help us improve these field trips for you guys. We appreciate you being here, and we certainly hope that you guys enjoyed your adventure in agriculture. Have a good day.